Europe has been struggling to deal with the seemingly endless flow of refugees from the Syrian conflict. But this week offers some hope for respite after a new agreement with Turkey. The EU is now set to offer a $3 billion aid package and renewed focus on accession talks in exchange for Turkey's help in reducing the flow of refugees to Europe. Leaders are hailing it as a major breakthrough, but many obstacles still remain.
Relieving the pressure. As the EU grapples with the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, the path to a solution may lie through neighbouring Turkey. A summit with the Turkish PM has produced a deal that many hope will help stem the tide.
This is not about the EU outsourcing its security and migration policy to Turkey. Nor is it about adding a burden on Turkey, a country that has demonstrated its solidarity to more than 2 million refugees and is itself experiencing the strains from dealing with this situation. But it is about addressing these challenges together.
Once implemented, the deal will have the EU offer an initial €3 billion in aid to Ankara to help improve living conditions of the 2.2 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. The EU will revisit accession talks, specifically the economic and financial chapters, in order to accelerate Turkey's integration with the bloc. New visa reforms will also be fast-tracked, allowing Turks to go visa-free into Europe's Schengen area by October 2016. And finally, an EU-Turkey summit will be put in place twice a year to intensify top-level dialogue. In return, Turkey will tighten border controls and take back unqualified asylum seekers from Europe.
One message from Ankara, clear message. We are a European nation. The destiny of our continent belongs to us, to all of you. And for the future of European continent, Turkey is ready to do everything possible, not just to respond to refugee crisis, but also to respond to all the crises or issues regarding the future of our continent. We want to be a member of European family.
However, there are doubts and concerns on both sides about the agreement. It's still not clear where the €3 billion will come from, and EU membership for Turkey is still far from a done deal, with lingering concerns over the country's economy, cultural differences, and human rights record. It's a deal that's divided critics, but for EU leaders it's a decisive first step in finding a common solution to the refugee crisis.
For more on the refugee crisis discussion inside Europe, we are joined by our guest in Ankara, Turkey, Dr. Mustafa Kutlay, who is the director of the Center for EU Studies at the International Strategic Research Organization, also known as USAK. He is also a professor at Top University of Economics and Technology. Welcome, Professor. And also in London, in the United Kingdom, we are having Ms. Susie Dennison, Senior Fellow and also Co-Director for European Power at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, ma'am. First of all, how much burden do you think this specific deal is likely to help ease on the migration crisis for the EU countries? Let's go to Ms. Dennison first.
Hello there. From my perspective, I think this deal is significant. Turkey is at the centre of the EU strategy in terms of trying to manage the countries around its the relationships with the countries around its external borders in order to reduce refugee flows into Europe at the moment. But I think we should be under no illusion that this is going to stop refugee flows. Indeed, I think the deal as a whole is indicative of a sense that Europe still hasn't really accepted that the inflows which it's seeing at the moment are part of what it should expect to be the new normal, and that will continue to be the case over the coming months and years, almost regardless of these efforts around the border. That said, we have seen since the deal was struck on Sunday, Turkey make some quite significant efforts in terms of stopping hundreds of people. It's apparently arrested a number of people smugglers on the border near Lesbos, and so I think we're likely to see Turkey make efforts on this front, but it has to be part of a much bigger package.
Professor Kutlay, what is the realistic estimate or assessment you really have about Turkey's capability of doing that, of being, quote-unquote, the gate of the European continent when it comes to this migration or refugee crisis?
Yeah, it's in fact really a difficult problem for Turkey, and because in the current situation, Turkey is hosting more than 2 million Syrian refugees. And in the joint action plan that was agreed on Sunday, wants actually two things from Turkey. First thing is that Turkey should improve the legal and socio-economic infrastructure in Turkey for Syrian refugees in order to convince these people to stay in Turkey rather than migrate to the European Union countries. The second one is that the Turkish government and Turkish security forces should better protect their borders in order not to allow the illegal refugee flows to the European Union countries. These are really ambitious goals because achieving two of these goals simultaneously is quite difficult for Turkey, and that's why this is an ambitious plan, I think, and in the incoming days we will see how successful Turkey will perform this duty. But I need to say at this point that this is really quite a challenging test for Turkey and for the European Union as well.
Both of you put it very clearly. Is this deal, in a way, Turkey and also the European Union, a wishful thinking plan? I mean, people just are struggling with ideas, and this is one of those, and they throw it out and say, let's just let it work, but without knowing how it would work and what would make it work. Professor Kutlay.
You are right. Actually, I do not want to say this is a wishful thinking, but we need to see the challenges ahead. And because this is a kind of plan that aims to stop the migration flows to the European Union countries. But where do these people go? The second important question is that as long as the conflict in Syria continues, as long as civil war goes on in Middle Eastern states, then this is going to be a huge challenge for not only Turkey but for the European Union countries. So I cannot be very optimistic about the possible optimistic scenarios about the future of these migration crises.
Professor Kutlay was mainly talking about the challenges Turkey would face in terms of being an important player in this Turkey-EU plan in implementing the solutions to the refugee crisis. But Ms. Dennison, I want to ask you from another perspective. That is the credibility of Turkey, if I could. I mean, at this moment, Turkey is being assigned, according to this deal, with a huge task of deciding who is going to be the quote-unquote safe ones to enter other European countries. However, according to some sources, Turkey is not necessarily a neutral country. Also reflected this time in various rounds of tensions, not only with Russia, but also with Syria and other countries. So, Ms. Dennison, can Turkey be able to become this guard of the European continent, given its political stance, which might be not necessarily in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've absolutely put your finger on it, that Europe cannot ask Turkey to do a job that it is unable to do in terms of managing its borders. And the central drive for control and increased resource in that border management effort needs to come from European states. I think the other part of this deal which is important to highlight is that refugees in Turkey at the moment are in refugee camps, which are by definition, whether they're in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon or elsewhere, they're temporary situations. The people living there are in a sort of limbo. They're not able to work in most instances. They're not able to sort of create a life in which they support themselves. And so they will continue to want to move on from there. and Europe is the desired destination for a lot of those individuals. So I think that what Europe needs to be doing is thinking about 4 angles in terms of handling the problem of arrivals in Europe. Firstly, controlling its own borders. Secondly, improving the reception processing itself. And I think as part of that, it needs to revisit the Dublin Convention, which assumes that applications for refugee status are made within Europe in the first country of arrival, because those 2 aspects are creating major problems in terms of how the receptions are being managed. I think thirdly, Europe needs to think about the internationalization of the solution to this problem, and by that I don't mean just the countries on its external borders like Turkey, but also the US, China, Gulf states, all international partners who have certain capacities, and through the UN system and others, I think Europe should be talking about that. And then finally, I think there needs to be much more diplomatic attention to the root causes of the refugee crisis, including the Syria conflict, where we haven't seen Europe play the central role which it has on other talks and could be doing here.
Let me be more specific rather than talking about all of these general points. Professor Kutlai, what about that credibility issue that I just raised to Ms. Dennison about Turkey geopolitically, and also within your own border you have the Kurds problem, and how is that going to spill over to Turkey's capability of judgment in terms of being a guard of the European continent when it comes to these Syrian refugees? Second question I have for you is more sympathy toward Turkey. Being promised the 3 billion euro, none of those has really come into being at the moment. Without the money, can Turkey function to the promises it has already made? Who is now, Professor, I want to ask, really finalizing some of the detailed solutions coming out of this huge, beautiful picture of agreement between Turkey and the EU?
Regarding your first question, actually, the challenges are quite huge for Turkey in terms of legal structure and in terms of the security point of view as well. Because, as I mentioned, there are more than 2 million people living in Turkey, Syrian refugees, and just 200,000 of them are living in refugee camps. It means that the rest of the Syrian migrants, refugees, are scattered all around the country. So documenting them, following them, and implementing legal processes about these people are quite difficult. So it may be a big challenge for Turkey in terms of its capacity to oversee the flow of these people to the European Union countries. This is the first challenge regarding your question. When it comes to the second question about the funding issue, actually you are right. The European Union leaders promised to finance Turkey, and it's going to be 3 billion euros. But we don't know where does this money come from for the time being. European Commission will be in the game around 500 million euro, but the rest of the money will be distributed among the members, and we don't know yet. And the second thing that we don't know is whether this funding will be just one-time funding or it's going to be an initial funding. So we need to also work out about the details of this process as well. Just 3 billion euros will not be enough, this is for sure. But if it's not the final amount, then how this funding will be sustained and distributed. These are the most important issues that we need to discuss in the incoming days regarding the financial aspect of the deal.
And I want to also press you a little bit further about the detailed plan. If Turkey has promised the European Union in exchange of a possible entry into the European Union by Turkey in the future as membership, and also in exchange for some of the financial support for settling these refugee crises inside Turkey, then what can Turkey do? Has Turkey really detailed some of the implementation plans given its promises to the European Union regarding the refugee crisis?
Yeah, actually there are important points that Turkey can achieve in the incoming months. The first and most important one of these regulations most probably will be the integration of these Syrian refugees into the Turkish labor market. In the current legal structure, these people are Turkey's guests, quote unquote. From a legal point of view, their status is still unclear. What Turkey can do in the incoming months is to provide a new legal infrastructure in compliance with international norms and European Union acquis. So this is going to be the first issue. By doing so, these people, rather than perceiving as temporary guests, they may be incorporated in the Turkish labor market, and accordingly they can also be provided better education in order to become competitive in Turkish labor market in the incoming years. This is a long-term process. From legal and institutional point of view, there are points that Turkey needs to achieve. But on the other side of the coin, by just trying to integrate these people into Turkish society will not solve the problem, or by just providing funding to Turkey will not solve Europe's migration problem. So European Union also needs to do more in order to stem flow of migrants into Europe. Another important point, I think, is about the Turkey-EU negotiation process. Turkey does not perceive this issue just a kind of migration crisis. Turkey thinks that this is an opportunity to improve Turkey-EU relations, and if new negotiation chapters can be opened, if Turkey's membership process progresses, then it's going to be easier for Turkey and European Union to better deal with the migration crisis. This is the other important point that Turkey highlights during the negotiations.
Yes, indeed. And therefore, I want to come back to you, Ms. Dennison, about some of those points. One is the Turkey-EU relations. Turkey, according to Professor Kutlay, has been betting a lot on this deal as an important component for the possibility improving its opportunities into EU member country. And secondly, it is also about how Turkey, together with other EU member countries, going to work as an important component to provide insights into solutions to the Syrian crisis on these real-rooted problems that we are already seeing, not to mention the geopolitical issue between Turkey and Russia, between Turkey and some of the other countries inside the EU. How do you think about these rooted problems? Have those been given any thoughts, Ms. Dennison?
Well, firstly, on the accession negotiations, I think it's important to say that yes, this is part of the package which was being agreed on Sunday, and the EU, for its part, has recommitted under that heading to moving things forward with Turkey. The refugee crisis has entirely changed the context in Europe. Both at a domestic political level and in terms of the sort of the level of cohesion within the European Union around these issues. But there are aspects of the accession negotiations with Turkey which haven't changed, and in a sense, I have to say that the problems that were there before, the blockages that were there before around a number of chapters, will still have to be worked through. And added to that, you have a much more divided Europe, which on its side isn't really in a place at the moment to be making kind of substantial changes to its structure and so on. So I don't think we should underestimate the difficulty of that part of the deal in terms of moving it forward. But yes, the political commitment is there. In terms of the broader geopolitical picture, I totally agree with your characterization that that Turkey isn't a disinterested party in terms of some of what we refer to as the root causes of the refugee flows, the Syrian conflict being part of it. But then nobody is a disinterested party. You've got a number of European states now that are engaged in the coalition against the Islamic State. You've got a discussion ongoing at the moment in the UK about whether to up the stakes in that sense. So yes, this absolutely does have to to be about Europe working together with the other regional actors who are critical to this picture in order to try to find some solutions to that 5-year conflict in this current environment.
It seems as long as there is a solution, no matter whether it's really workable or not, at least we can grab on it and just let it being displayed in front of the public. We hope this plan will work, but we'll see how it could work. Thank you so much for both of you. Mustafa Kutlay coming from Turkey in Ankara, and Susie Dennison coming from London with us. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.